So masking is what we're talking about. Yeah, we were talking last time about the uh, ins and outs of people sharing or not sharing that they are autistic, and how people might respond to that. But before people get to that point, there's a long history of masking, which then people just become aware of. And of course, it feeds into that whole thing of people saying, well, I wouldn't have thought you were, and all of that. But masking doesn't kind of suddenly drop away either, though bits of it do. So, it's a big topic. I think along with understanding what autism actually is and isn't, probably the next biggest thing that we need to understand if we're working with autistic clients is the whole idea of masking. And we may well need to even educate them partly around it. So yeah, that's what I'm going to dig into a bit today. In this podcast, we're talking about masking, and a lot to say because it's a big topic. And we talk about what it means and where it comes from and the damage it causes and important it is for therapists to understand, and a whole lot of other stuff that I think is fascinating in a way that's, it's a scary territory in a way, but and a really vitally important one.
And how we touch on how you can differentiate it from regular social compliance, how early it can start in life, what it looks like, how the person does it, and what the costs are.
There is some evidence that for autistic and other neurodivergent children, that some masking starts literally from the beginning.
Yeah, you don't just find out you're autistic and then start masking, because it sort of begins, doesn't it, as in childhood as a unconscious coping strategy long before people even know that they are autistic. Usually, the clients that we're going to be seeing as adult autistic people who've not known as children that they were autistic, or even if they did, they might have known later on in childhood. They still would have been masking before then. You don't just find out you're autistic and then start masking. It's not that way around.
Massive amounts of it aren't conscious. I mean, it gets more conscious, particularly I think as people get into adolescence and early adulthood.
Yeah,
I think it becomes a more conscious process. But there's evidence. By the way, the just my bookshelf, the new and definitive but relatively heavy book, Autistic Masking by Pearson and Rose, and just out a couple of months ago. I'm only halfway through it. It's dense enough, but it's comprehensive. It's got everything and every bit of research and every relevant concept in it on the subject of masking. So if anyone who's really seriously interested in is check out that book. But like for instance, there is some evidence that for autistic and other neurodivergent children, that some masking starts literally from the beginning, like infant. There isn't possible for it to be too early in a way. There's already something happening where if your responses aren't picked up in a way that mirrors back that they're okay, that they already start changing or being subdued at some level, that you already feel, no, not consciously at all, but somehow I better change that a bit because I get a better reaction if I do this. And this links in hugely with the whole area of trauma responses and that whole psychology. It links in with identity development and the whole complexity of that in childhood and adolescence and early adulthood. It links in with the whole concept of stigmatization and of any minority and the impact that has. And, as I said, there's lots of interesting places. You'll find more on that, but certainly the most comprehensive I've ever seen is that book. It's going to be an important book. We possibly should just say a little bit of what masking is. Do you want to?
First of all, though, just want to pick up on something that you just said that was really interesting, is that because it can start so very, very young, literally from day one, listeners might be thinking, well, how is that different to any baby that adapts to get their needs met from their caregiver? But there is a difference, isn't there? Because when we're talking about masking, we are talking about literally hiding oneself. It's not about adaptation or getting the best results or social compliance. It's offering out a wholesale representation of oneself that is acceptable rather than behavioral. It's not the things that you're doing, it's who I am. It's what you're displaying as who I am. Would you agree?
Oh, totally. And that partly ties in with, again, the unconscious beginnings of it. Masking, though it's the most popular term, is not an entirely useful name
I
for
know
the
you don't
process.
like it, do you? Yeah.
Well, I like it in a sense, like it's a simple word to use, and then we can, kind of add to that and say, well, we can also say, and, we say things like we could also call it, over adaptation or impression management or overcompensation or camouflaging and, self-censoring. There's lots of other, we can then add to it. But the starting term is usually masking. And the difficulty I have with it is that mask gives the impression of something, first of all, that you can put on and take off quite easily.
Yeah.
And secondly, something that fools other people, but not yourself. You know who you are behind the mask. And neither of those things is true. Now, if you know the movie The Mask with Jim Carrey in it, from whenever that was back in was it the 90s or whatever, it's that kind of mask, maybe. Yes. That's the mask we're talking about because first of all, it just gets intertwined with who you are, as you were describing there. And you're as confused as anyone else might be. It's not just that you know who you are and you're just playing a conscious game. It's very, very much about, kind of bending over backwards, like bending yourself out of shape, repressing and denying parts of yourself, even to yourself, trying so hard to be something else that in fact you're just mimicking, that you begin to believe yourself that you're that. It's much more that's how deep it goes. I mean, it is just, other interesting, language that's used around it, like Damien Milton talks about the normalization agenda, that you're just trying so desperately hard to fit into a template that you don't fit, square peg in the round hole, that you damage yourself, and you don't even fit in properly, so it's a huge topic in working with anyone who's discovered they're autistic at any age,
And that thing about mimicking that you're saying as well, I mean, it is a massive topic. The thing about mimicking, I think as therapists, let's honor masking. Let's honor the individual, because a vast amount of information collated over many years and many hours of study and contemplation and practice and application and feedback review has gone into being a person who successfully masks. I was saying to someone the other day, actually, it's like, imagine a native Portuguese person moves to China and passes as Chinese. That's what we're talking about, right? Imagine what's got to go into pulling that off successfully. That's what we're dealing with. It's not social compliance. It's not like doing all the social traditions that Chinese people do. It's passing as Chinese. That's the key thing, isn't it? And that can include mimicking. They can be observing and mimicking of things such as facial expressions and gestures, and researching as well, like researching norms or unspoken rules, so that you can then not show that you didn't know.
Yeah. And I mean, that is an interesting example, and it is one of the more conscious kind of examples that you'd see a lot of then particularly in late childhood and adolescence. This kind of a lot of autistic adults say that in that stage of their life, approaching puberty and into adolescence, that they felt as if everyone else had got a handbook about how to behave interpersonally and socially, and they hadn't got it, So they're looking for the rules. And of course, most people don't have conscious rules, but the autistic person is lost without them, and even with them is only partially successful. But they're looking for that's what you do in that circumstance. Okay, I'll do that. Yeah.
And you see, you've got the internet now, so there's the WikiHow things all over the place on the internet that people might not even, particularly clients, might not even register that they're reading. But if you talk to older people who were adolescent before there was the internet, it's not uncommon to find that they had how-to guides like etiquette
mm,
or
mm,
social rules
mm,
or body language or astrology signs,
mm.
to kind of understand what people are like or what's supposed to happen or how you're meant to be.
Well, also, you know, a question I sometimes explore with clients is like, who helped to coach them to mask? And I don't mean that in any sinister way, though, of course, it
Mm,
can be sometimes. But what I mean is like the older brother or sister who says, no, don't do that. That just makes you seem silly. Do you know what I mean? Don't be
mhm,
so enthusiastic about that. People think it's childish, and they're trying to do you a favor because
mm,
they didn't want you to be laughed at,
mm,
but they are basically telling you squash part of your personality,
mhm.
or, and this is a scary one looking back, and currently probably, partly why we're doing what we're doing is therapists who tell a
Yeah.
client who they don't know is autistic and the client doesn't know they're autistic. Let's approach it this way, but this way may only be relevant for non-autistic people and completely inappropriate for an autistic person. But it's done in a well-meaning way to help the
Mm.
person to have friends or
Not get
get
laughed
a,
at.
yeah, get on better with their boss, so that their job easier or whatever, and yet sometimes we're just enabling masking.
Yeah, if the client laps it up or seeks out people who do that for them, then it is enabling, isn't it? Or it can be shaming even, because it's like, oh gosh, I didn't realize, I didn't know that I was doing it wrong.
Your Portuguese person in China analogy there was interesting because I think the extra bit I would add to it is that the Portuguese person passes as Chinese and kind of gets away with it, and yet if you ask the Chinese people who know them, they'll
Yeah,
say, I don't quite like them either. There's
there's
something about
something.
them,
Yeah.
it's like we're not even fully successful. It's in the end of it all we're working 10 times as hard. That's another interesting piece about this because that
Mm,
means you are living kind of 5 lifetimes for every one that a non-masking person is living. So much effort has to go in.
mhm.
I like the analogy that they say in ballroom dancing, women do everything the man does, but backwards and wearing high heels. And so it's like that sense of that, yeah, we're doing everything that everyone else does, but it's taking 5 times the effort. And is only, if we're lucky, maybe 80% is successful. Do you know what I mean? There's still that gap. There's still that sense that people have that we're not quite the real thing and
I
we
know.
let ourselves down, or people feel we're a little odd, or our facial expressions still let us down, or, and people think, God, they're a bit aloof or they're a bit funny, or, I don't quite warm to them, or, and we're still not actually fitting in, and we can still feel left out and rejected and wonder why everybody else arranged to meet and they didn't invite us, despite
Mm,
all of the bending over backwards,
mm.
so um
I
it,
remember reading a study about that actually, about how non-autistic people do judge autistic social behavior more harshly, even when the autistic person is masking. And it's sort of suggesting, isn't it, that there is an implicit bias against atypical behavior,
yes,
regardless of those masking efforts. If there's one chink, or
yeah.
some kind, they feel like in the vibes that something's not wasn't, it's not quite feeling right, about that person.
Well, the bit that's been kind of getting a bit clearer for me, I think, recently is that I think that one way of describing it is a little bit like starting with the non-autistic side, with neurotypical society, um, and to say that what's happening in typical society is there's a whole lot of signals going back and forward all the time that the people aren't even conscious that they're giving.
Yeah.
It's just, a particular kind of eye contact or a particular kind of banter or a particular kind of handshake, or not a secret one, not one that anybody's
No.
conscious of,
Mm,
but everybody does it. And if somebody comes from somewhere where it's different and now they're living in a particular place, they almost automatically adjust to it, in a way that isn't any damaging for them. And they just adjust
mm.
into that. And somehow autistic people are only getting a secondhand version of that. We're getting a lot of it right, but then the bits we don't even know about and we're missing out on. And the neurotypical people wouldn't even be able to name what it is. They wouldn't be
Yeah,
able to
sure.
say, well, it's
Yeah.
because they don't do this. But there is some things we don't do, and they give us away, and people are not comfortable with us. They're uncomfortable with us, you know?
Or maybe 99 times it has worked, and on this one particular time, like you say, there's not been the adjustment because the template has been run through
Mm.
without the adjusting from the feedback or something that's unconscious as well.
Mm.
A lot of questions around that, actually, isn't it? It'd be nice
Either
to
it,
pin that down over time to,
yeah,
to work out what's behind it.
what is actually going on. Yeah. And
Mm,
that is some of what people are trying to do, including Pearson and Rose, you know, are certainly trying to, with the bit of research. I mean, pretty much every bit of research that's been done, they're including in the book. But, you know, that just shows that there hasn't been a lot of research here. You wouldn't be able to include it all in one book. There's an awful lot to be looked at still here. And the bit I was leading up to a minute ago, and it's coming back to me now, is this is one of the main causes of autistic burnout then.
Yeah, I know, because if you think about all the energy it takes to do that, conscious energy, and like in every cell of your body almost, you know, because you're not just doing a behavior, you're literally being something that you're presenting forward. So that can be really costly. It can be stressful because you know, if you're constantly trying to monitor whether it's working, whether you're getting away with it, you know, but also there's like not just burnout, you know, there's like other consequences as well, aren't there? Such as like anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
you know, stress. Do you know what I found interesting as well when I was reading up on it? Is that it, of course, fits in with how it can mask finding out that you're autistic or knowing that you're autistic. Because if you're so successfully masking, you wouldn't think to look there. And other people will always be saying, oh, you don't look autistic, like you said at the beginning. But also, it doesn't allow for an emergence of one's identity, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. And in some ways, that's the real tragedy, is,
Is
you know,
yeah,
all that you're missing out on. A lot of autistic people really feel a lot of grief around that. But if they realize they're autistic in their whatever 40s, 50s, 60s, you know, where the good bit of life has already gone by, and they kind of feel like, you know, I'm now trying to grasp some of my true identity with both hands as quick as I can, sort of thing. But imagine if I'd had that chance from my mid-teens or somewhere like that, you know, what I might have done different, you know, if I'd just been able to get on with being myself instead of this survival mode, you know, kind of game that takes so much energy and twists us so out of shape.
And feeling resentment to others as well. And also even like mad at yourself, you know, for the self-betrayal.
Oh, yeah, I think so. And shame
Yeah.
and self-criticism and low self-esteem. It's just your relationship with yourself is not going to be good, you know? I mean, you've done your best. All of this is done for obvious reasons of trying to have some bit of validation and safety from bullying and some sort of success in career and all those things that you can, some part of you knows you're not getting by just relaxing and being yourself, you know. But the damage is huge, and to be honest, only again beginning to be properly understood. There's a lot of parallels that are useful, and they talk about them in the book as well, that we can learn something about autistic masking by studying what we know about the experience of, Black people in America, gay, bi, LGBTQ people over, a long stretch of history in many, many places, including still in many countries, if not all. That sense that how safe is it to just relax and be myself? And to what extent from an early age have I learned to hide things, adjust things, over adapt, find what's acceptable and what's seen as appropriate and just do more and more of that, consciously and unconsciously. Now, there's differences, but that's also interesting as well. None of those things is exactly like the experience of of growing up autistic
Yeah.
and knowing it. But there are things we can learn.
Actually, that's a really important point, isn't it? Because the other thing is as well, like you said, it's not just a mask that you take off. And actually, you should, even if you could, you shouldn't, because there are real risks. You know, there are real dangers. You know, and like any defense strategy or mechanism, it's there for protection originally, whether you might want to reevaluate situations and find different ways to meet those risks. But certainly you've got to be aware of them and be able to get a chance to assess it and be able to mitigate the risks. You can't just whiz your defenses off and then just go out totally unprotected. That's not on, is it? You know, it's like, so gradually over time, as we're working with clients, it's not to do it with a blunt instrument, so to speak. It's like an emerging, isn't it? It's like an assessing for safety, and it's okay to choose to mask sometimes.
Oh yeah,
You're doing it in awareness and you want to, for whatever reason.
Like a job interview, you know.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, ideally you wouldn't, because
ideally, but
in the long term, you want them to see you as the real you. Ideally, but if you end up doing that, then you end up doing that, don't you? You know, because it takes time. It takes time.
Particularly at the moment, I mean, maybe in 20 years' time, it might be less of a risk to be your obvious autistic self in a job interview. Right now, I think we'd have to be realistic. If you're able to fake it a bit, well, then you're probably more likely to get the job if you do that.
I suppose it depends what kind of company you're going forward to, doesn't it? And what age group, and it's different, isn't it, for everyone? And actually, starting masking in the first place, I think, is a very individual and subjective thing, because we're not even saying that every autistic person does this. It's not a feature of autism. It's a feature of human beings who are finding themselves in a situation of being different and feeling under threat about that difference, actually.
Yeah.
And then they choose to use that strategy to more or less degrees, depending on the individual.
It comes from being and feeling yourself in a category, even if you don't have a name for the category, which you can see is stigmatized both by individuals around you and actually by society in general. And this is not a good thing to be. I need to be something else is the obvious strategy.
And that assessment is individual, you see.
Very, very. It depends on circumstances, as you say. It varies how much someone masks, and actually not all autistic people mask at all. I know some autistic people who didn't feel the need to mask at all, but that's to do with the environment they grew up in. That's because they grew up in an environment that felt very safe to be the person they are.
They were getting their needs met. And
that does happen. Some people are lucky enough between their family and their school experience and their friends and ultimately their job and their relationships, whatever direction they go in life, that actually it's largely a good experience and people find them being the person they are. And then maybe later on they discover that's autistic, but it hasn't been something they've had bad experience of. It can still be helpful for them to discover that's who they are. They can still work even better with themselves and get their best out of themselves, but they don't necessarily change how they come across to other people because they haven't been masking. But it's very common to some extent or other. Very, very common. And then, it means that we're trying to help clients understand this. So there's a bit of psychoeducation and a bit of the kind of discussion we're having and a bit of just putting names on things and looking for examples and explaining that it's unconscious as a child and gets a bit more conscious so that the person can start to make a bit sense of the history of it. I think to go through the history of it a bit is helpful. I find adolescence a good starting point actually rather than childhood, because it's almost like you can dive straight in there and almost immediately find examples, because actually to a smaller extent, quite a lot of adolescents mask a little bit anyway. It doesn't cover
they're very concerned with social compliance and
that's
being
it.
accepted, and they're testing out having influence, aren't they, about how people treat them or how they're seen. Anyway, there
are lots of adolescents that doesn't cover their whole personality or affect their future greatly. It's just that at this point in time with this bunch of people, they're trying to pretend to be something they're not and squash parts of themselves, So that's a feature, I think, in adolescence anyway. And for autistic people, they immediately generally remember examples of how they desperately tried to to fit in and be different and utterly deny parts of themselves and even try and stop liking certain things because they were seen still as very childish things to like, to say nothing of lie about liking them. Like various writers talk about this, Pete Warmby and people like that talks about, loving Lego still. I mean, he's in his 40s and he still loves Lego, but as a teenager, you're supposed to stop loving Lego. Child is okay, but so you have to.
When we grew up, yeah, I mean, it's different now, isn't it? It's like a cool and trendy thing to be
Yeah.
nerdy and have things, or what we would have called nerdy anyway, but in the days when, when I think back to being in my 20s, you wouldn't have, you'd have to have been very confident and very secure to say that you were still into Lego. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I think adolescence is just, it's a fruitful place to start getting a feel of the history of it.
That's what we're dealing with.
And then we can go back to childhood a bit and
because even if the therapist goes to adolescence with their client, I'm just thinking about that. Even then, like you say, it's the age group where it's age appropriate to be testing out, transitioning from childhood into semi-adulthood. You think you're transitioning into adulthood, but of course you're in a very fortunate and wonderful time in your life when you've got everything going for you and lots of opportunities or difficulties and challenges. It's a massive change, isn't it, from childhood to transitioning slowly over many years into independent living and adulthood. And so there's that time of testing. It's like, well, who am I going to be? What's my life going to be about? What do I believe in? What do people think about me? It's not that those are masking things, that when people behave in certain ways or they take on certain trialing things out or becoming certain ways. It's more about like what's behind it. But you often find, don't you, that with autistic clients, it's a time of intense fear. Actually, it's
and often loneliness.
Curious.
Yeah, and loneliness as well.
Of course, yeah. And it's like, it's frightening. It's like, why is everybody changing? Why can't it just be the same? What's it all about? How am I supposed to do this? It's really scary. And often you don't know that not everybody else is feeling that. People talk about adolescence, about how challenging it is. You don't realize it for you. It's super duper different.
Yeah. And, like, how are people making these transitions? And, I'm lost, but also feeling, but I'm not sure that I want to anyway. It's like some of the stuff that my fellow teens are saying, this is wonderful, like being in a, I don't know, massively crowded pub or our dance floor is like, but that means I'm supposed to like that, but secretly deep down, I don't like it, but I better like it because there's nothing else on offer. That's how you live in the world at my age in this town, but there's no other show in town. I mean, I remember that, like growing up in Ireland, there's nothing else but the pub scene, like as you get into later adolescence and into early 20s, that's it, you're in the pub or you're on your own, no, not absolutely precisely. Obviously, you could be out camping with the scouts. I'm not saying there's literally nothing else, but there's close enough to compared to the dominance of that scene. And even then, you'd be doing something else. But if you run up against the main people that you go to school with, whatever, they'll think you're weird because you weren't at the pub at the weekend. You're off doing something else, So it goes very deep. It takes a while to get a sense of how deep it goes. Yeah.
And the differential here is yes, I know that people go along with it because that's what you're doing at that age group and blah, blah, blah. I think the difference with the autistic person could be something like, this is what I'm supposed to be wanting to do. And so therefore I must do. I must hide or not even investigate or consider what my real desires and interests are, ways I like to be. I have to be seen to be going along with this or wanting to.
And actually, maybe the other bit that makes me think of, and maybe this is the piece to start winding down today on, and we might talk more about unmasking and supporting plans and unmasking next time. But it's like, particularly again, I think in adolescence, you're also getting the feeling, and there's something deeply wrong with me that I like those things. Clearly I'm a freak. Clearly I'm badly made. Clearly there's a flaw. What's wrong with me? That's an awful feeling. someone to have in a pervasive way. It's not a nice feeling to have even briefly, but to have in some pervasive way, that's a terrible, terrible feeling. And again, leads you back to masking, leads you back thinking, well, I better try and be something that's less freaky, even for my own sake, even whatever other people think of me. I'm thinking I'm a weirdo because I'd prefer read a book than go to the
If you
book.
even know that,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you might not even know if we're masking aspects of our true identity to
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
And also, as well, people are responding to you in that adult body. They're not responding to you as as a child anymore. So there's the different approaches that you get from people and the ways that people interact with you and expect and want different things from you. That puts a lot of pressure on you, to be like trying to be responsive to this, and quickly as well. And you can sort of overdo it, such as starting dating when you don't really understand a lot about it, and you can be in deep water very fast. Or
Absolutely.
like with drinking or anything like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, hope now there's the internet and there's lots of information out there, which is
That is a help, I think, for some of the young clients I have. I can see it is, they actually can kind of go and check some things out, read a little bit of psychology, read a little bit of self-help, read a little bit of information about relationships, about sexuality. It's all out there. Go to the right places. Of course, they can also go to the wrong places, but
and they talk to each other about it anyway, which we would never have been able to do. We just couldn't broach those kinds of things. You couldn't say, I don't understand this. I don't know why it's behaving like that.
We might be picking up masking before we go on to unmasking next time, I suppose, at this stage. And at the looks of it, it is just one of the biggest topics of all to get a feel of, I think.
And we're trying to obviously make it relevant to people who are working, people who are offering professional services in terms of health and well-being for people,
So helping people, supporting people and guiding people in a way through the process of gently unmasking in whatever ways and speed they want is the piece then we'll talk a bit more specifically about next time.
While navigating the road and not stepping into the shame potholes and the normalization agenda potholes and all kinds of meaty, wonderful topics.
Yes, absolutely. Scary topics, but essential topics. Yeah. Great. Okay.
Yeah, great chat. Thanks so much. And actually, I was so enthralled. Never looked at the chat.
Oh, I checked. Yeah, it's quiet on the chat. So everyone else was enthralled as well, maybe. So that's good. Yeah, analysis. So, how about?
Bye. That was a really good discussion.
Great. Oh, yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And we always get rolling and quick enough. And, we always fly along. We have plenty to say and plenty of interesting things and spark each other off nicely. Yeah.
Yeah. Lively conversation.
Yeah.
What should we talk about next week then? We talk about unmasking, shall we?
Yeah. I think so. We'll just pick up masking again just to mind and see whether we go down any other tracks with it. But I think, we should then move into a bit more of what's the process of unmasking like with or without therapy, but, particularly with therapy. Yeah.
I read a lovely article actually last week as well that's well worth sharing with clients or anybody. It was in Scientific American and it was called Coming Out Autistic. It's on the internet by Brandy Shillace. And they were excelling academically as a child, but struggling socially and had sensory sensitivity challenges. And that they saw that masking was seen as the solution, adapting to fit in rather than accepting their differences. And that what had happened is that they were told by somebody that they worked with, I think, or that they knew and trusted, that this other person was autistic, and they said, you're autistic. No, I'm not suggesting that you should say that to people at all. I'm just saying that's what happened to this particular author. And it set that person, at first they were shocked, because they'd internalized so much stigma around it that they just never had thought that that was relevant to them or that it could be possible. But that set that person off onto exploring and they resonated with it and explained the process of self-discovery and leading into a journey of self-acceptance, and finally realizing actually that masking never was the answer, but accommodating it, but acknowledging and having compassion for themselves, realizing it was just a traumatic attempt to hide themselves. It's a lovely piece, actually. It talks a lot about gender as well.
Yes, I just see it here now. I just got it up. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
nice article, actually.
Steve Silverman had an article in Scientific American the other day as well.
Yeah.
About autism. Yeah. I haven't read it yet, but it's autism, human connection, and the double empathy problem. Steve Silverman. Yeah, and I haven't read it yet. So yeah, the Scientific American seemed to be getting into it.
Ones, well, that's something that definitely recommend. And obviously, in the end, we're hoping that the environment's safe enough, isn't it, so that people get social support without judgment, really, and there's no need to mask because differences are already accommodated.
That's it. I know. Yeah. All right, better.
Yep.
Leave it there. Cool. Okay. Great stuff.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Yeah. See you next week.
All right. Great. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.